Shalom. Welcome to Lights of the Nations. As ever, we're talking about the positive commandment of building the Holy Temple. And lately, I hope you were together with us as we analyzed the concept of the relationship between the building of the Beit HaMikdash and the coming of the Moshiach, the anticipated arrival of the Messiah, the divine promise of HaShem, that there will be the redemption and the Messiah will usher in that era that all humanity awaits. But did a linkage, maybe even an unnatural linkage, develop subconsciously or consciously within the mindset of Israel over the years that somehow seems to anticipate a connection between these two things that doesn't necessarily exist? This is what we were attempting to address the past few weeks as we analyzed the commandment of building the Holy Temple, based, of course, on everything that we have been studying over the past 2 years. In Maimonides, the Hilchot Beit HaBeChira, the laws of building the Holy Temple, trying to put that in perspective, or rather put into perspective the notion that is widespread and people have regarding the coming of the Messiah, but put that in perspective with the reality that we know of the beckoning of the mitzvah to be fulfilled. There is a commandment to build the Holy Temple, which is a commandment of all of Israel. And notwithstanding all the political problems and all the political obstacles, which we're not dealing with in this particular context, those have to be overcome, but those are not religious issues. We talked about the question of the Messiah and his relationship with the temple. And in so doing, we really had to deal with some very core, fundamental issues of Jewish thought, because we had to analyze, well, what is a commandment? Because if the basic infrastructure, cornerstone of our thought regarding this is that God commands and we fulfill, not that we expect God to fulfill the commandment, then we know that there can't possibly be any sort of discrimination, favoritism, or special category regarding any of the commandments. But if God commanded them to us once, they are for all time. And indeed, that's really what we proved in our analysis. We showed that the Rambam himself teaches us in his beautiful letter on persecution that none of the commandments are dependent on the arrival of the Messiah for their fulfillment, and indeed that one is not supposed to wait for the Messiah to come to fulfill a certain commandment or to have him fulfill the commandment, that's not his role. We also spoke about some verses in the Torah. We also actually showed in the Rambam's own writings within the Mishnah Torah, but in Hilchot Melachim, we showed how the Rambam teaches us that our sages explicitly inform us that there is no set order chronologically which has to be fulfilled in order for our particular scenario of prophetic fulfillment to be satisfied. Rather, any number of different scenarios may indeed play out. There are so many factors that are not really known to us, and the Rambam really explains, I think, in a very beautiful way as well, that we understood that there are Messianic aspirations and there are Messianic manifestations throughout history. Hare, the great Bar Kochva, who was indeed considered to be great and considered to be a leader to the extent of Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues proclaiming him to have been the Messiah. We understand all of that in the historical context as the tremendous potential that he had because of the great self-sacrifice, dedication, and courage that he exhibited in trying to bring about the redemption for Israel. But of course, he was not the anticipated Moshiach. And we discussed all of these things and how the Rambam himself explains to us that no person really knows exactly how these things are going to transpire until the time. And in the meantime, he even goes and tells us some very important advice regarding our Torah study. He tells us not to be overly obsessed with this whole concept, because it doesn't help us to change the world, which is our major mandate. It doesn't help us to be filled with the love and fear of God. It can be kind of a distraction. And what I think the Rambam really meant by that, I'm just reviewing a little bit what we discussed in those weeks. I think he also means that people have a tendency in our drudgery-filled, weary world, people have a tendency to romanticize the future very, very much. That's okay. We certainly do have a future to look forward to, and we certainly do have the promises of the Torah. But what I mean by romanticize is people have a tendency to get all their stuff that they have, all of their issues that are unresolved, which they are, it's not a nice thing to say, too lazy to work on, really, to try to resolve, or for whatever reason they are not really, they don't have the ability to summon the fortitude of character to work it out. You find a lot of people take their issues and dump them on the Moshiach. That when he comes, he's going to take care of everything, from my boss, just looking at my employee here, to my mother-in-law, to my neighbor, to all those people that are bothering me and all those issues. Mashiach will take care of all of that. Well, again, that is definitely a facet of our anticipation of Mashiach, that he will see to it that justice prevails. All sorts of justice, including social justice, that we can definitely anticipate an end to the corruption and the misery and the cynicism and the usury that we are unfortunately accustomed to seeing in this world today. We can expect him to put an end to that. But he doesn't come to take us off the hook of any responsibility and obligation that the Torah places upon us. And this has been the problem. I think we really demonstrated that in the last 3 lessons in Light to the Nations, when we talked about the relationship between the Temple and the Messiah. There has been a mindset which has infiltrated the consciousness collectively of the Jewish people, clearly as a result of our exile experience, which has basically sought to console us that, the temple will be built all right, and that day will come. But it's so far off, and it's so surrounded with mystery and uncertainty, because it's not in our realm to fulfill it at all. The Mashiach will take care of it. So if you want to pray for the Mashiach, pray for the Mashiach, pray for the building of the temple, but don't think, says this little voice, that the diaspora has eaten away at our cells and lobotomized us, right? The little voice says, don't think that you can do anything about it. Practically speaking, you're crazy if you look at the current geopolitical reality and you think that we might actually see the building of the temple in Jerusalem today. That's where that comes from. I believe that it's been superimposed onto our collective consciousness as a punishment, really, as a result. It's an illness that's come about as a result of what we have been through in the diaspora. But now that we're home, and if you're not home, you should be. Now that we're home, does that apply? That kind of thinking, does it really is it holy to think that Moshiach is going to build the temple? Is it rooted in true, authentic Torah thought? I did my best in the past 3 lessons to show you that it isn't. But that true Torah thought from Rabbi Akiva through and including the Rambam until our day, true Torah thought is that the Jewish people accepted the covenant of our relationship with the Holy One, blessed be He, at Sinai. We have the mitzvot to fulfill, all of them. Waiting for the Mashiach is not an excuse not to do the mitzvot. We wait for the Mashiach regardless. But just like the Rambam said, don't think that he's going to take you to Eretz Israel on eagle's wings and everything is going to be pie in the sky and he's going to take care of all your problems. He says, if you're being persecuted somewhere else and you don't go to the land of Israel now, then you're living in a fool's paradise, and you're lying also, because his job is not to tell you, now do the mitzvah. If the mitzvah is to be in Eretz Yisrael, then it's the mitzvah now. Okay, same thing with the building of the temple. This is our review until now, and I bring all of this up now because now we're going on to a new stage. And that is the popular notion, which is extremely widespread, that the third temple will descend ready-made from heaven. Now, I would like to afford this concept the same fair and equal treatment that we afforded the subject of the relationship between the temple and the Moshiach. And I want to investigate if this is a Torah concept, if this can be proven, if this has any parallels anywhere in the written or oral Torah, if this can be sourced to Jewish law. Where does this come from? Are there any precedents? Is this normative, halachic Jewish thinking as it relates to the continuum of the tradition of Torah knowledge ever since Sinai? I want to examine all of these things, see if we can possibly determine a pattern. Because these two ideas are like a two-pronged frontal attack on the concept of the building of the temple today. And as it stands today, these two notions are the two most widely held positions of opposition that we who seek to advocate on behalf of the building of the temple, this is what we're always presented with. Besides those who either say that the temple is totally irrelevant and who needs it anyway, and those who say that the temple, building the temple and any talk thereof will cause the beginning of the Third World War and apocalypse and all that kind of stuff, Armageddon. You have in between many upstanding, Torah-minded, good people who believe that, well, that's all fine and good that you want to build a temple, but don't you know that the Moshiach is going to build a temple? And I'm trying to show them everything that we discussed in the last 3 programs. Then you have those who say, well, you know, HaShem himself is going to build the third temple. And this is something that is oft quoted. So we want to analyze, is this Torah? Is this halakha? Is it possible? Is it something in between? And we're going to find that this also is going to be a valuable contribution to our understanding of not only the relevance of the Holy Torah and all of the commandments in our lives, but also need to analyze again, just as we discussed in our series about the temple and the Moshiach, we needed to define what is Moshiach, what does he accomplish, who is he? So too, we had to define the structure of the commandments, just as I said, the most basic principle. The commandments are all the time for everyone now. And when God commands something, as I always like to say, he doesn't change his mind afterwards. And if something is commanded to us and included as a positive commandment, then it's for us to do, not for one person to do. Wait, if that's true, now we move on to this new idea, this new subject, the temple, man-made or heaven-sent. And the question is going to be, well, if all of the commandments are commanded by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by the Holy One, blessed be He, for us to do, where do we find an instance in the Torah of HaShem fulfilling one of the commandments for us by proxy? Because isn't that what these people are saying? As soon as you say that HaShem is going to bring the third temple ready-made from heaven, you are saying something utterly new. You're saying that here's a mitzvah, unlike all the other mitzvot in the Torah. All the other mitzvot in the Torah, and Hashem said to Moshe speaking, speak to the children of Israel and tell them, and all the other various action-oriented expressions throughout the Torah. But here you're saying that there's one mitzvah which is different than all the others. And that mitzvah is the building of the temple, and you may be right that we're supposed to keep kosher, keep Shabbat, put on tefillin, build a sukkah, all kinds of things, but when it comes to the temple, HaShem is going to bring that down from heaven. I need to know why. I need you to know, where does it say that? So I'm starting out, before we go to any sources, just asking you logically if you've ever seen anything like that. Let's look at the language. I have an idea. Let's look at the language of the verse. We have a lot to do. First of all, let's go to the verse. And remember that what I don't have to remind you of, because we spent so much time on it together, the Rambam, Hilchot Beit HaBeChira, the first entry of chapter 1, halacha 1 of the Rambam's Laws of the Holy Temple, Mitzvat aseh lasot bayit lashem muchan lihiyot bo makrivim hakorbanot. It is a positive commandment to erect a house for God, ready to bring there the offerings. Exodus 25, Parshat Truma, and verse 8. In Hebrew, very important, Ve'asu li mikdash, v'shachanti bitocham, and they shall make a sanctuary for me, so that I may dwell among them. Okay. They shall make. They shall make. Now, that reminds me of something that we say every single day in our morning and evening Shema, which actually comes from the book of Numbers. It comes from the book of Numbers, Parshat Shalach, and we find it actually in chapter 15 of the book of Numbers, in verse 37. HaShem said to Moshe, saying in Hebrew, Vayomer HaShem el Moshe lemor, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'amart aleim, va'asu lahem tzitzit. HaShem said to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them that they shall make themselves tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations. Everybody is familiar with the tzitzit, these fringes that we wear on the corners of our garments, and the reason that we wear them is because of this mitzvah. Here's a positive commandment that we find right here in the book of Numbers, and that's the whole subject of the tzitzit. But what I want to point out is, well, this is interesting. Look, it's the same language. When it comes to Exodus 25:8, it says, Va'asu li mikdash, they shall make for me a sanctuary. When it comes to Numbers, chapter 15 and verse 38, it says, Va'asu lahem tzitzit, they shall make for themselves tzitzit. So why would I think that one word really means tzitzit? I mean, it's very serious. Here they are. And nobody that I know or that I've ever met or heard of wears tzitzit that came down from heaven. So why would the same word be used regarding the temple, which of course, when it came to the first temple, we know that it was built by men. And it came to the second temple, we know that it was built by men. Okay, well maybe the third temple is different somehow. Maybe when it comes to the third temple, there's some sort of proviso somewhere. Let's examine. Somewhere in the written Torah or the oral tradition, and there's so many volumes, there must be something somewhere if everyone thinks so. Maybe there is a condition somewhere that seems to state, okay, the first temple was built in the hands of man, the second temple was built in the hands of man, but the third temple is something else altogether. And so all of the things that I'm saying, the comparisons with tzitzit and everything, the language and the very concept, structurally, infrastructure, the whole idea of the essence of a mitzvah that Hashem commands and we fulfill, not that we wait for Him to fulfill it. Okay, that might all be true, they'll say, but when it comes to the third temple, that's different. And they might cite some very important sources. They might tell us that in the mystical literature of our sages, in the holiest part of the Torah, the inner dimension of the Torah, the Kabbalah, maybe the Zohar says that the temple is going to come down from heaven. Maybe that's what they'll say. Is that true? Because that would change everything, because of course the Zohar is the real thing. So we have to see, is that what the Zohar is saying? And they'll also tell us, well, isn't there a Rashi somewhere commenting on Tractate Sukkot, Tractate Sukkah, that seems to indicate there in Masechet Sukkah, in Tractate Sukkah, Rashi tells us that the third temple is going to come down from heaven. Well, he is a very religious man, very learned rabbi, Rashi. You know how we feel about Rashi. Great commentator, so maybe he tells us that. So we have to look at all of these things. There are many sources that are quoted by the proponents of the temple from heaven idea. And they're going to come and tell us a list of sources that seem to indicate or imply that the third temple indeed is something else altogether. It's going to come down from heaven. And that would, of course, just put egg on our face, would say that we are wasting our time, that there's no reason for us to be making any effort to raise consciousness towards the importance of building the temple, or to try to actually accomplish it or move towards it, because according to these sources, why the temple is supposed to come down. So let's see. We're going to look now and examine all of these sources. And let's not forget how we started. We're starting on a very simple level, on the most basic level. We're starting with our own minds. We're starting with logic. And we're asking ourselves, according to everything that we know, and believe me, we're actually starting very high, because without, referring to any sort of outside text or any sort of prejudice that we might have intellectually, or any sort of preconceived notion, just ask yourself, everything that you know so far about everything that we believe in, everything that you know so far about the Holy Torah, everything that you know so far about what HaShem expects from us, and especially our teaching that we have stressed consistently without let-up, and that we have gleaned and distilled and emphasized from every single Torah teaching that we've ever shared together, which is what? The personal responsibility of every person in this world to make the world into a better place, to do the tikkun, the rectification of all mankind, of ourselves, to do something in this world. Action, action, action. So if that's the case, where would we get such an idea that when it comes to the third temple, it's totally different? This is what we need to see. And first I'll just ask you the most basic question of all. And you see here, Va'asu Mikdash, Exodus 25:8, let them make for me a sanctuary. And then in the book of Numbers, chapter 15 and verse 38, make tzitzis for themselves, same word make. But I want to ask you another question, okay? Everybody builds a sukkah when it comes to the grand and beautiful holiday of Sukkot, the tabernacles. And the sukkah actually in many ways parallels some concept of the Holy Temple, because it really is about being enveloped in the presence of the Shekhinah. And it's also a remembrance to the clouds of glory. And I myself have always said that the closest experience that you can have today to being in the Holy Temple is to be in the sukkah. But yet, did you ever meet anybody that waits for their sukkah to come down from heaven? And I like to use this, by the way, when people ask me, well, you're talking about building the temple, but isn't it supposed to come down from heaven? I always say to them, do you build a sukkah? Are you accustomed to building a sukkah? And they say, well, of course. And I say, how come you don't wait for it to come down? And they go, oh, that's crazy. Who would wait for their sukkah to come down? That's crazy. What's the matter with you? Sukkah come down from heaven, you're supposed to make a sukkah. Okay, here's the thing. Here's something that people turn to. I'll start with the light ammunition before we go into the heavy artillery. Okay? People point out a psalm, a very beautiful psalm, which is actually Psalm number 127. Psalm 127 is a song of ascents for Solomon. It was actually written by King David. King David is the major editor and author of the majority of the book of Psalms. And this is a psalm which he dedicated to his son Solomon, because the first temple in many ways, in some regards, is called after David. David, was the initiator of the temple. He actually did a great deal of work towards the infrastructure of the building of the first temple, but it was not his role to build it. That was done by his son King Solomon. So this is a psalm which David wrote for Solomon, and it was regarding the dedication of the first temple. And it says, a song of ascents for Solomon. If HaShem will not build the house, in vain do its builders labor on it. If HaShem will not guard the city, in vain is the watchman vigilant. And people point to this psalm and they say, stop right there. This psalm is an indication that the temple is built by HaShem. And this is really a beautiful, inspiring psalm. It's one of my favorites. It's 127. Go look. A song of ascents for Solomon. If God, the Lord, HaShem, will not build the house, in vain do its builders labor on it. There you go. That seems to tell us that It is HaShem himself who builds the temple. There's only one problem with that, and that is that everybody knows that this psalm is talking not about the third temple, but about the first temple. It's a song of ascents for Solomon, and it's about the first temple. And when we turn to the book of Kings, and we turn to chapter 6 of Kings 1, and we look at the incredible description of the amount of time and the incredible amount of labor that went into the building of the first temple. What did it take? 7 years? And here I'm still looking in chapter 5. Verse 29, Solomon had 70,000 who carried burdens and 80,000 who hewed in the mountain, in addition to Solomon's 3,300 chief officers. I mean, we're talking here about unbelievable amounts of time and workers and materials that were used in the building of the first temple in the entire chapter 6. It's a catalog of what it took to accomplish this incredible feat. And yet Psalms 127 tells us, if HaShem will not build it, in vain do its labors toil. But yet we're talking there about the first temple. Well, what is the contradiction here between Psalm 127 and King 6? No. And this is how we begin our study. There's no contradiction at all. It's like any other effort that a human being makes, like having a child. Can a man and a woman really understand how they bring a child into this world? Everything that we do, if it's not blessed by HaShem, it's all in vain. So yes, 127 is indeed talking about the first temple, but we look in the book of Kings and we know exactly what went into building it, but HaShem also blessed the project and also participated. Maybe this is a key to understanding how we're going to approach this entire subject, the subject of the Shekhinah, the subject of the Holy Temple, the light to Israel, and the light to the nations.